In July 1995, retired Royal Air Force aerial photographic interpreter and cartographic draftsman Jim Allen travelled to Bolivia, hired a jeep, and drove into the desert. In particular, he was interested in the Altiplano, an extensive area of high plateau within the Andes Mountains, dramatically inhospitable, framed by titanic active volcanoes, and chilled by strong winds and a desert polar climate. A lifelong passion bolstered by technical expertise had pushed Allen to the region, for it was there, on the shore of the fast-disappearing remnants of an ancient inland sea, that he placed the mythical and fabulous island city of Atlantis. Superficially, it was an improbable claim that Atlantis, a once flourishing island nation rumoured to have existed somewhere beyond the Pillars of Hercules, could have been situated some 12,000 feet above sea level. And yet Allen, using satellite images and his own on-the-ground investigations, uncovered what appears to be lengths and lengths of hitherto unacknowledged canals, waterway systems which not merely hinted at the existence of an ancient advanced civilization in the area, but seemed somehow to match classical descriptions of the lost city. After all, Allen was not merely conducting guesswork. He was being guided by Plato, the Athenian philosopher who, in the 4th century BC, immortalized the lost city of Atlantis in his writings. It was, so Plato recorded, a land of abundance, fully impregnable and enclosed by belts of sea and land, with golden statues, hot and cold springs, and wealth beyond imagining. A veritable paradise which one day was swallowed up by the sea. This great catastrophe wiped Atlantis off the map, with prevailing academic thought today determining Plato's writings about the island to be fictional. Nothing more than an allegorical tool which he wove into his work so as to illuminate upon the hubris of nations. And so, for most, the existence of Atlantis is now considered to be a controversial topic. For, if true, it would disprove the basis upon which society has built its understanding of the world. For certainly Plato wrote that Atlantis fell some 9,000 years before his time, which would mean that what we regard as the chronology of civilization is wrong, and that, far from only having just developed the basics of agriculture, as history teaches us to be true, mankind was in fact already capable of so much more. Crafting empires, building great temples, housing large stocks of domesticated animals, cultivating fruit of every kind, and mining and processing all manner of precious metals. While such a proposition may very well shake the foundations of established academia, belief has not been deterred. For indeed Jim Allen's Bolivian expedition was but one in a long line of attempts at uncovering the lost island of Atlantis. For him and others, Atlantis is not a fictional device, but a truth which, if brought to light, would shatter everything we claim to know about prehistory, and thus ourselves today. Before we explore further, I'd like to take a quick moment to thank Established Titles for graciously sponsoring today's video, and for elevating me to the title of Lady. Established Titles is a unique project which makes use of Scottish custom to enable you to call yourself Lord or Lady. Based on a historic tradition whereby landowners are referred to as lairds or lords and ladies, Established Titles allows you to buy at least 1 square foot of dedicated land on a private estate in rural Scotland. Formalised by a beautiful proclamatory certificate, this dedication features a unique plot number and allows you in perpetuity to be known by the style and title of Lord or Lady. And this means that you could officially change your name to use your newly obtained title on credit cards, plane tickets, dinner reservations, and even dating profiles. And Established Titles not only helps you to purchase a piece of splendid natural Scotland, they also help you to preserve it. For with every order, a tree is planted in the UK or elsewhere around the world, with them working with charities including One Tree Planted to support global reforestation efforts. Aside from being an eccentric way to not so subtly aggrandize yourself and humble your peers, established titles, lordships and ladyships packs make wonderful gifts, especially at the last minute for Mother's Day. At the moment, established titles are running a suitably grand sale for Mother's Day, and if you use the code Paranormal Scholar, you can get an additional 10% off. Simply visit establishedtitles.com/Paranormal Scholar or check out the link in the description to take a look and help to support conservation efforts around the world in a fun and memorable way. Thank you. Mention of Atlantis first appears in Timaeus, one of Plato's dialogues written around 360 BC, taking the form of a discussion between the title character and several others, including the ancient Athenian political figure Critias and the philosopher Socrates. The dialogue explores the nature of the physical world, with Socrates referencing their previous discussion, the one central to Plato's most famous work, the Republic, namely what form the ideal state would take. It is at this point in the dialogue that Critias tells Socrates that their discussion reminded him of an odd tale that was attested to by the statesman Solon, friend and relative of Critias's great-grandfather and one of the 7 sages of Greece who set Athens on the road to democracy. The odd tale, so it turned out, was about Atlantis, and how 9,000 years earlier both it and Athens had not merely existed, but had thrived. Whilst travelling through Egypt, Solon, so Critias relays to Socrates, had supposedly met with priests who knew much about ancient times. Admirers of Athenians and so happy to speak with the great statesman, the priests are said to have told Solon about a great flood which cleansed the earth of much that had been there before, including the cities of Athens and Atlantis. The fairest and noblest race among mankind once lived in your country, the priests are described as having said to Solon, whence ye sprang, and all your city which now is, from a very little seed that of old was left over. That his Athens was built from the remnants of an older, more advanced version of the same city was news to Solon, and so he entreated the priests to tell him more. That they did, reporting on how Athens, a powerful and righteous city, had some 9,000 years ago halted the approach of another great power, invaders from the island of Atlantis. For our chronicles tell what a power your city quelled of old, that marched in wanton insolence upon all Europe and Asia together, issuing yonder from the Atlantic Ocean. For in those days the sea could be crossed, since it had an island before the mouth of the strait, which is called, as ye say, the Pillars of Heracles. Now this island was greater than Libya and Asia together. In this island Atlantis arose a great and marvellous might of kings, ruling over all the island itself and many other islands and parts of the mainland. So all this power gathered itself together, and your country and ours and the whole region within the strait it sought with one single swoop to enslave. Athens, the priests explained, was successful, vanquishing the invaders and liberating those who had been subjugated by Atlantis. That Solon had been unaware of this history was allegedly due to a later disaster, namely great earthquakes and floods which, in just one day and night of destruction, caused all the warriors of Athens to be swallowed up by the earth, and the island of Atlantis to sink beneath the sea and vanish away. Many more details about the lost island are subsequently shared, both in Timaeus and also in Plato's sequel dialogue, Critias. Despite academic assertion, it is not known whether or not these conversations are fictional. Certainly, Critias not only represents a real historical figure, but began his story by saying, "Listen then, Socrates, to a tale which, strange though it be, is yet perfectly true, as Solon, the wisest of the 7, once affirmed." Given how well respected Solon was at the time, it can be said to be improbable that Plato would have attributed a fanciful story to him, and thus risk staining his reputation. Moreover, if one is to give credence to the notion that the Atlantis story is fictional, assessing Plato's writings as a whole becomes problematic. After all, much of what we know about the philosopher Socrates, who authored no texts, comes to us via his student Plato and his posthumous accounts. And so, if we begin to cast doubt on elements of Plato's writings which, to all intent and purpose, are presented as perfectly true by real conversation participants within the dialogue, where do we then draw the line between truth and fiction? Is what we assume to be true about Socrates also made up, a mere fictional device of Plato's utilized for the purpose of presenting some higher intellectual concept? In many ways, it can be said to be awfully convenient that those elements deemed to be unsavory by the standard of orthodox intellectual tastes are fictional, and that the rest, no threat to conventional history, are true and deserving of academic adoration. Atlantis being real would be too messy to reconcile with established history, and so it is agreeable, no matter how unbelievable, to disregard Plato's references to it. Thus, as ever, when attempting to climb the ivory towers of academia, intellectualism very quickly starts to look an awful lot like pseudo-intellectualism. In this way, those who have attempted to locate the ancient, now lost civilization of Atlantis start to look more justified. One such researcher is George Furman, who, like many other Atlantis enthusiasts, believing Plato, has focused on his reference to the Pillars of Hercules in an attempt to find the island. The Pillars of Hercules lie at the entrance of the Strait of Gibraltar, which transitions the Mediterranean Sea into the Atlantic Ocean. Looking close by, Furman places Atlantis around the area of the Azores Islands. In fact, he claims that the islands are fragmentary remnants of a once great island nation. After all, the Azores lie atop a huge underwater mountain range known as the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. Through tectonic pressures and climate conditions, this ridge could have been above sea level during the Ice Age, up to 40,000 years before the glaciers melted and sea levels rose dramatically more than 10,000 years ago. Under these conditions, a large island landmass could very well have existed in this area, with a climate ideal for human habitation, and possibly even for the flourishing empire of Atlantis. Considered within the context of Plato's Timaeus and the alleged war between Atlantis and Athens, the Azores and the Mid-Atlantic Ridge can be said to be well located to have interacted with Mediterranean cultures, with the islands today being a part of Portugal. Adding weight to the argument for there being a lost civilization in this region are the discoveries made in recent decades by the Portuguese Association of Archaeological Research. Fascinatingly, on Pico Island alone, archaeologists have unearthed a tremendous 140 proto-historic pyramidal rock structures, up to 43 feet tall. Seemingly built with intended purpose and aligned with the summer solstice, they can be said to indicate the presence of a once great, now forgotten, ancient civilization. And this is just what has been uncovered on land. Under the waves, there has been little exploration, and yet a private yacht owner, without even meaning to, stumbled upon a perfectly shaped pyramidal structure 40 meters beneath the sea off the coast of one of the islands. In fact, even before these more recent discoveries, Soviet oceanographers between the 1950s and 1980s are reported to have discovered deeply submerged ruins of stone columns, stairways, and buildings in the Azores. Beyond the Azores, another potential location for the lost continent of Atlantis is on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, in and around the quite aptly named Antilles. One of the most intriguing and esoteric searches was undertaken by the Association of Research and Enlightenment, an organization located in Virginia Beach, which believes and promotes the values of the mystic and clairvoyant Edgar Cayce. Cayce was a very popular and well-known psychic personality in the early 20th century. Among his many claims was that he was a reincarnation of an ancient Atlantean. Known as the Sleeping Prophet, he alleged to be able to channel information from the non-physical realm, revealing details such as the advanced technologies of Atlantis and how they fell after a period of greed and material obsession. Sensationally, in one of his sessions, he prophesied that the remains of his once home would be located off the Bahamian island of Bimini between 1968 and 69. Shockingly, in 1968, the association appeared to fulfill his prediction when they discovered great rows of megaliths dubbed Bimini Road off Bimini's Paradise Point. Initially, there were high hopes that this would prove to be Atlantis. However, the scientific establishment immediately launched an aggressive academic assault against their findings, cherry-picking evidence so as to reduce the Atlantis claim to ridicule, all without ever thoroughly disproving that the block formations were man-made. That said, many reputable scientists did come to the defense of the pro-Atlantean group, advocating that the Bimini Road was an ancient relic and possibly once belonged to Atlantis. This included Dr. J. Manson Valentine, a holder of multiple doctorates from Yale University. Disputing the assertion that the formation was naturally occurring, Valentine drew attention to several unexplained features of the road. Strangely, unlike the soft beach rock found in the area, the blocks of the road are made of a hard stone which rings when struck with a blunt object. They are also stronger than the surrounding beach rock and exhibit unnaturally straight sides. Not only this, they are parallel and terminate in cornerstones. In short, Valentine concluded that the road's layout was designed, something which becomes all the more apparent when viewed from above. To all of this, the scientific community was silent. In the many years since Bimini Road's discovery, they have also failed to provide adequate explanations to even the most basic observations made at the site, such as diverse peculiar descriptions of stone support columns being underneath the megaliths. And yet, for all of this, the scientific community can at least be praised for having addressed the discovery of the Bimini Road. After all, a discovery even more phenomenal than the one off Paradise Point, made by accredited scientists over 30 years later off the coast of Cuba, was utterly disregarded. In the year 2000, a group of scientists and salvagers, with official permission, were searching for shipwrecks in Cuban waters. They were an expert team, having discovered the wreck of the USS Maine in Havana Bay whilst only testing their equipment. As such, all were excited to see what else they could discover. So when they reported that they had high-resolution sonar images of something on the seabed, treasures unimagined came to mind. In reality, they had found something even rarer than lost gold, what appeared to be the lost city of Atlantis. One of the senior members of the team was Paul Weinsberg, and he confirmed in an interview that the sonar images depicted very large structures extending over several kilometers, some as long as 400 meters and up to 40 meters high off the coast of Cabo San Antonio. The sunken structures had different shapes and displayed a good deal of architectural symmetry. In the interview, Weinsberg described how the images were sent to scientists around the world, with early responses being that it was not geology, and was instead a great mystery. Incredibly, Weinsberg himself even stated that it was obvious that if it is a major settlement of a pre-classical or Atlantean nature, then the whole thing just sank altogether during some disastrous geological event. Another on the team, the ocean engineer and head of the expedition, elaborated upon this, stating that the landmass upon which the structures had been built seemed to have just sank flat between 15,000 and 50,000 years ago. Half a mile under the waves, she described the settlement as being on a beautiful, flat, clean area. A description which correlates to Critias's description of Atlantis being positioned on a flat, rectangular plain. The engineer also confirmed that the sunken city covered approximately 20 square kilometers and is positioned in a huge white silicon field. In the middle of all of that are these megalithic structures surfacing out of it. Strangely, many of these structures appear to be pyramidal in shape. Furthermore, the team took samples from them and concluded that they were made of a very polished granite, a material which is totally foreign to Cuba, with there being no granite on the island, only limestone. The nearest place where granite could have come from would have been central Mexico, where there are also pyramids. In 2002, the team attempted to secure further funding for another expedition to the site. wanting to probe further and even send robots down to examine the structure's interiors. Given the lack of further information about this discovery, one can only assume that the funding never materialized. The sunken city was an academic embarrassment. It is in fact known in academic circles that any such research will never gain funding, as John Gifford of the University of Miami so aptly said in 2001. It is just a fact of life in this case that no one and no organisation is going to fund a prehistoric underwater archaeological survey of the Bahamas. Academia, by and large, is completely closed off to the idea of Atlantis. It didn't exist. Plato's remarks were fictional, and any archaeological evidence which seems to suggest something that even marginally deviates from the established historical narrative is either blasphemy or should be ignored altogether. In this way, it is not an overstatement to say that the blanket ban on intellectual discussion about the possibility of a lost prehistoric civilization goes beyond simple denial and enters the realm of hysteria. After all, physical evidence can be said to be everywhere. In addition to pleasure boaters casually stumbling across ancient underwater pyramids, there are also hints of at least one ancient advanced civilization having occupied Earth before those which are officially acknowledged. For example, in his book Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings, the American college professor Charles Hapgood concluded that 16th century maps, including the Piri-Reis map, appeared to have been compiled from much earlier sources. Not only were the maps, given their suggested age, shockingly accurate, they also depicted lands which had, as of 1513, not yet been discovered, including Antarctica. Even more baffling was how the maps appeared to show the coastline at a time when it was relatively free of ice, not as it would have been in the 16th century. All of this implied, according to Hapgood, that some unknown ancient civilization must have developed significant cartographic knowledge which was then later preserved by 16th century map makers. Might this advanced civilization have been the legendary Atlantis? Additional evidence for an unknown ancient civilization having traversed the globe can be found in Egypt, in the tombs of numerous mummies, including a 21st dynasty priestess. Strangely, in 1992, when a German toxicologist conducted tests on her remains so as to verify the use of opium in religious rites, the hair of the ancient Egyptian priestess revealed significant amounts of cocaine and nicotine, two substances that originate from the Americas and were not thought to have been exported until after Columbus's famed discovery of the New World in 1492. With the mummy and the many others who also tested positive for these drugs being at least 3,000 years old, the findings were considered impossible and have since been disregarded as contaminated samples. Even so, for many, like Hapgood's maps, the cocaine mummies, as they are now known, seem to point to a globalized world having existed long before our time. Framing this through the lens of Atlantean thought, it has been suggested that, after Atlantis fell, with the island being sunk during some great disaster, its people and their culture dispersed and diffused across the planet. In this way, one might also consider the global prevalence of architecturally similar pyramidal structures, from Mexico to the Azores to Egypt to Iraq, to indeed the bottom of the ocean just off the coast of Cuba. Thus, the more one looks, the more one finds, until it becomes clear that the mystery of Atlantis is not merely about a missing island nation, or even, as Plato recorded in Timaeus, a great empire which ruled over all the island itself and many other islands and parts of the mainland as well, but about human civilization and how it may well be much older than orthodox teaching asserts. After all, with there being so much archaeological evidence of unknown ancient civilizations, ranging from Bolivia to the Azores to beyond, Atlantis could have been one of many. Hardly a blip, but rather representative of a lost age of human advancement, which came to an end after a series of natural disasters. While such may at first be difficult to digest, the conundrum of Atlantis, if proven correct, would not be the first time that academic hubris has stood in the way of enlightenment. Certainly, Mesoamerican cultures have been consistently misrepresented by European academics. One example is how, for many years, the Maya were regarded as little more than peaceful savages, deemed to be largely irrelevant compared to European cultures. And yet, we now know that not only were the Maya anything but peaceful, engaging for centuries in extensive warfare and trophy-taking, they also developed a rich and complex culture, replete with art, mathematics, science, elaborate architecture, and a sophisticated writing system. All of this could have been realised much sooner had a more hands-on anthropological approach, whereby researchers actively engaged with the material they were studying and not merely from a distant university library, not been so discredited by conventional historians. In this way, a similar conclusion can be drawn when one looks to the Aztec peoples and their considered to be mythical ancestral homeland, Aztlan. Writing in his book Atlantis, the Andes Solution, Jim Allen remarks how traditional descriptions of Aztlan bear many similarities to Plato's Atlantis. It was a utopian city with abundant resources, located on an island in the middle of a large body of water. Its people tended to floating gardens, similar to those irrigated by canals described in Atlantis. The island city stood in the shadow of cavernous hills, comparable to the mountainous fringes of Atlantis. The people of Aztlan were even forced to leave after a great natural catastrophe. It is said that remembrance of their ancestral home left such a profound scar on the Aztecs that when they founded Tenochtitlan in the Valley of Mexico in 1325, it was established in the image of Aztlan. According to historian Nigel Davis, the priests gave the orders that the nearby river should be dammed. Once the dam was made, the waters spread all over the plain, forming a great lagoon. And so the city was erected in the centre on an island built on reclaimed land, with the water itself ringed by a kind of giant horseshoe of mountains on the east, south and west sides. In other words, the Mexica, for this is what the people of Aztlan called themselves after migrating, was seeking to reproduce the condition of their former home. By the time of the conquest, Tenochtitlan was thought to have been a city larger and more splendid than any in Europe, with temples, canals, markets of fresh produce, and of course, pyramids. Today, Atlantean fingerprints in Mexico are arguably just as visible, not merely in the historic centre of Mexico City, but at the archaeological site of Tula, and the colossal warrior statues known as Atlanteans. And so, if the Mexicas say they are descended from the ancient people of Atlantis, perhaps, all things considered, we should at least entertain this as a possibility. Yet, as long as academia regards this as little more than a nice story, interesting but not worthy of true discussion, we may never learn the truth of Atlantis and the wider world which her people inhabited. After all, there are so many mysteries still yet to be explained in prehistory. The origin of technologies, how mankind knew how to do all that it did. Even things which are taken for granted, such as the advent of agriculture, are not adequately explained. And so there appear to be no answers. Only if we listen to our ancient ancestors and the stories which survive can we begin to have a better understanding, and through Atlantis and the great flood which was said to have destroyed it, catch a glimpse of both the lost city and of our forgotten and forbidden past. Thank you so much for watching. I truly hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe for more of the paranormal. And if you cannot wait until my next video, why not check out the ones suggested on screen now. Until next time,